You ready to roll? Let's get into it. We started this series last week called Silent Night, Finding Your Calm and Bright. Last week, all of our emphasis was on reconciliation with God. If you missed it, it was a good week. I strongly encourage you to jump online and get on our YouTube channel and catch up from last week. Or you can download the app and select Castle Rock, and you'll find all things Castle Rock, including yours truly. So download the app, but catch up on last week. Last week was a great week. Let me tell you why. We saw 8 people last week say yes to Jesus. Yeah, it's real cool. Let me throw this in the mix. I could not have been sicker last Sunday. Probably the sickest I have ever been in my life, which just goes to show you God wants to do something in his church, right? 8 people came to know Jesus last week. I don't remember it, but I'm just joking. I promise you, I've been celebrating with you all week. If you are one of the 8, congratulations. Best decision you ever made. Catch up from last week. It was a good week. Last week we talked all about this reconciliation process with God. That his ultimate desire is to be reconciled with us, to be brought back into good standing, that we are in this relationship together, right? God sent his son to be born of a woman, fully man and fully God. That's the meaning of all of this, right? All of Christmas. Let me throw this into the mix because it just got remarkably louder next door. The kids are partying today. Can you tell? It's Christmas party. Did you see all their jammies when they came in? They look good. There's some adults in the mix that also have on their jammies, which is fine. I was going to wear mine, but Shayna said they weren't appropriate for church. And anyway, the kids are partying. They're watching movies next door and eating things and whatever else. So just tune them out. This side, I sincerely apologize. You can move forward or sideways if you need to. But we're going to go a different direction today. The band played one of my favorite Christmas songs and easily my favorite version of this song today, Joy to the World. Right? We sing it every year, Joy to the World. We talk about joy. Joy is everywhere when Christmas comes about. We sing about it, we read about it, we write about it, we talk about it. It's on all of our Christmas decorations. You know, we hang signs, and joy is everywhere. Everywhere we go, joy is everywhere. And yet, the question becomes, do we obtain it? Or more so, how do we obtain it? How do we hold on to joy? We talk about it. It's almost a Christmas cliche. But one of the paradoxes of this season is that joy is everywhere. It's all around us on everything that we do around Christmas. And yet so many of us constantly are sitting in extreme discouragement. Even though we talk about joy, even though we want joy, even though we strive for joy, and not only do we want joy, we want to see it permeate every part of our life and everything that we touch. One of the most famous scriptures that we hear in church when Christmas comes around comes from Luke chapter 2. In fact, the kids next door they're watching the Charlie Brown Christmas movie this morning. Have you seen it? Yeah? No, you've not seen it? So there's this part in the Charlie Brown Christmas movie where Linus, do we know Linus, carries the dirty blanket around? Linus goes up on stage to tell the meaning of Christmas, and he uses Luke chapter 2 in this verse. It pops up everywhere. Anytime I ever read this, I only picture Linus. This is what it says in Luke chapter 2. It says, I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. The Savior, yes, the Messiah, the Lord, has been born today in Bethlehem, the city of David. It's interesting because right off the bat, the angel says, I came to bring good news. The good news is Jesus. That would what? In turn, bring joy. Bring joy to who? To all people. I came to bring good news, and the good news will give joy to everybody. What's interesting about that, though, is for a lot of us, it feels like maybe we should be discounted from joy. Like maybe joy can't be part of our life because of this, or because of this, or because of this. And yet when you read Scripture, or even more focused, when you read this Christmas story, you find a whole bunch of people that should be discounted. Should be discounted from joy, should be discounted from the story. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the shepherds and kind of the sketchiness of shepherds, right? Remember that? Shepherds are relatively sketchy, and yet shepherds are part of this scene. Shepherds are there when Jesus is born. Probably should be discounted from the story. You find Mary and Joseph, The parents, young, poor, teenage, unwed parents, probably good candidates to be discounted from the story. You find the Magi show up shortly after. 3 men that bring gifts solely based on the star that they followed that brought them to Jesus. People that should have been discounted because these 3 men were very well versed in the occult, right? They devoted their lives to astrology and a whole bunch of other bizarre beliefs. And yet they're there. For us, maybe it's divorce, maybe it's doubt, maybe it's discouragement or disgrace, maybe it's our pride, maybe it's our guilt, maybe it's our addiction, things that probably should discount us from joy, discount us from the story. And yet constantly through Scripture, we're seeing things that bring those people back in the mix. We're going to look at joy this morning, but before we do, before we look at how we get it or what we should do to get it, let's take a look at what stands in our way. If you have notes, you can pull them out. Here's your first thing. Making happiness the ultimate goal will stand in our way from joy. Making happiness the ultimate goal. Happiness and joy are not the same thing. Can we clear that up right at the beginning? Joy is different than happiness. We don't find happiness directly. Happiness is a byproduct of something else, right? Does that make sense? I did a quick Google search this past week, and probably my favorite thing that I did this past week was this Google search. Okay, I show you some weird stuff from the internet, right, from time to time. God knows what I get into. But I did this Google search on happiness because I had this quote going through my head. We know part of it, right? Money can't buy us happiness, right? Money doesn't buy happiness. And I heard this quote a couple weeks ago, so I'm looking for it. Money doesn't buy happiness, but it can buy me a bunch of stuff that makes the misery a lot more pleasant, right? So I go looking for this quote, but I can't remember the second part exactly. So I just type in, money can't buy happiness, but it can buy. And I thought that I would rely on predictive search. Okay, you type something in and then it gives you like 6 of the most relevant options. I took a screenshot. Can you throw that up for me? You have it, right? No? Okay, I'm going to tell you about it. Okay? I worked really hard on that. It's not here. So this is what it is, right? I type in, money can't buy happiness, but it can buy, and then 7 things pop up. The first one was cars. The second one was things. The third one was chickens. The fourth one was cows. And the sixth one was a jet ski. And I thought to myself, how in the world do chickens and cows slip in between boats and jet skis? Here's the thing that the internet learns you, right? And for me, I'm like, it can buy things, it can buy chickens. God knows that it can buy baby or miniature donkeys. My internet knows about the miniature donkeys. I went on a hunt this past week, or yesterday rather, for new dogs. We got rid of our dog this week, which is a very, very sad situation. But it opened the door to a whole lot more pets. If anybody has anything wild that they're looking to get rid of, we will take them. Alpacas, donkeys, the list goes on. Predictive search led me down this thing that initially it said cars and things, and then it got into chickens and cows and a bunch of weird stuff, right? As the internet does. Happiness is a byproduct of something bigger, something different, whether it's cows, cars, or Jesus. Cows and cars bring happiness, but Jesus brings joy. Joy and happiness are different. Here's your second thing, failure to think relationally. Excuse me. What prevents us from getting joy is our inability to think relationally. Sometimes what gets in the way of joy is the fact that we don't necessarily craft our ability at relationships, and it gets in the way. Some of my biggest regrets in life, and I tell Shayna constantly, some of my biggest regrets in life is not investing in specific relationships, or maybe not investing in specific relationships soon enough, early enough on. I'm an introvert. I love that I'm an introvert. I feel like it has given me these insights that I probably wouldn't have had otherwise. But at the same time, it has caused me to be drawn back relationally, and that gets us in trouble. And the thing is, I've never met an introvert or an extrovert who has ever been able to do life happily without relationships, right? Our failure to think relationally will keep us from finding true joy. puts this giant wall between us and joy. Here's a third thing. You ready? Still with me? Is it too loud over there? Do I go yell at some people? Hey, you kids. Number 3, letting culture define joy. Letting culture define joy. It's funny because with Christmas this year, I think that Shayna and I have been more specific and strategic in our wish list than ever before. Shayna downloaded this app, right? And so we put in the things that we want. And when I put something into my app, she gets a notification, right? So this list keeps getting longer and longer. And at first I thought it was really cool, but I told you last week that Shayna has this desire to win Christmas this year. And so I realized the more things that I put on my list, the more things that she's buying. And it's drastically hurting my bank account. And I told her last night, because she wants to win so bad, that I was going to return all the gifts that I bought for her, spend the money on me, and I think the greatest gift is that I give her the victory, right? That got you, huh? However, so I have this friend that I was talking to the other day. Him and his wife decided a long time ago that they don't do Christmas lists. They don't want to tell each other what to buy, so I can go buy it myself. And so they don't do that, and that's their thing. And their thing is to allow the other one to hopefully buy the thing that brings that person joy, brings happiness to that person. And that's obviously a very tangible example between the difference in the two relationships. But the difference is letting someone else determine what brings us joy versus us choosing what brings ourselves joy. Does that make sense? Or even better, what if we go to God and allow God to define what brings us joy? Right? Here's the fourth thing. Relegating God to seasonal attention. Seasonal attention. Here's what I mean. I'm not talking about just Christmas. I'm not talking about Easter church people. Some of us go to church only on Easter, right? I'm not talking about those kind of seasons. I'm talking about the seasons of crisis, of problem. Yes, there are people that will only attend church, will only use God during holiday, but I'm talking about the seasons of life, where maybe we only use God, we only pray when we're sick. We only go to God when we're sick. We only use God in the problems and the crisis of life. Seasonal attention. And see, I said it earlier, what we have to understand is that joy and happiness are different. They're not the same thing. Joy is internal, and happiness is this external emotion that's triggered by life's events. Joy and happiness are very, very different. Understanding that they're different, let's talk about happiness for a second. They did a study on happiness, and they found that everybody has a baseline that they return to. They did this study with lottery winners, and they realized that after 8 weeks, lottery winners return back to their baseline. So you're like this, right? And then you win the lottery and you go like this, and then you return back to your happiness baseline. They did the same study on spinal cord injury victims, and they found that their baseline goes like this and then goes like this, but then they return back to their baseline of happiness. And we've got this baseline of happiness, but it goes like this frequently. Do you know what I'm talking about? Can you experience that in your life? Can you think of the examples in your life that look like that? These peaks and valleys. Happiness spikes, but joy is this thing that carries us straight through. Joy is a constant thing in our life. So how do we live like that? How do we live in this mode of joy rather than in the peaks and the valleys? In the book of Isaiah, the Syrians and the Assyrians are ravaging these countries, and God has put his blessing on these countries because they promote him, they speak him, they talk about God, they live for God, and so God is showing favor to them. But in the process of the Syrians and Assyrians ravaging these countries, Isaiah says this. It's coming towards the end, and in chapter 9 of Isaiah, he says this. It says, "Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan." So right up front, he's saying that there's this group of people, and at one point they're humbled, but very soon God is going to take this region, and he kind of lists off the land that's going to be covered in this blessing. He goes on, he says, "The people walking in distress have seen great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You've enlarged the nation and increased the joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of the oppressor. You following? You tracking that? It's a little heavy, right? Verse 5, every warrior's boots used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for fire. Here's where it gets good. Verse 6, for us, a child is born. To us, a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Here's how we find joy. Number one, we humbly receive wisdom. We humbly receive wisdom. Notice I didn't say that we find wisdom, so we receive wisdom. God's got this wisdom that he's willing to give, right? All we got to do is open ourselves up for it. Isaiah calls him Wonderful Counselor. At what point do we realize that we have these things in our life that maybe nobody else knows, but God knows what they are? God understands them. God knows them. God knows the battles that we're walking through. God knows the demons that we face. He knows our health concerns. He knows our addiction and the things that we struggle with in our sin. He understands these things. And Isaiah says he's going to be called Wonderful Counselor. He's writing this passage that references Jesus, but he's referencing this instance in history that is still 800 years in advance. Isaiah is talking about a baby that's going to be born, a son that's given, Jesus, that won't happen for 800 more years. The child will be born that fulfills the prophecy, and this child, 800 years in advance, is going to be called Wonderful Counselor. It's an indication of the character of the son that God is sending. Here's why. That word wonderful in this context literally translates to incomprehensible. So Isaiah is writing this, and he's almost saying there's this baby that's going to be born, and he's going to be incomprehensible. How good he is. The wonder that he is will blow your mind. We use that word all the time, right? Wonderful. The word wonderful here means incomprehensible. We don't necessarily use it that way. It's an average word, right? I probably use it every day. Last week we went and got pictures with Santa, me and Shayna. And we're waiting in line, and the kids were with us. And we're waiting in line for Santa, and the kids are excited to see Santa. We just barely made the cut before they closed the doors. And so we go see Santa, and this excitement is building. And then Santa lines are very long. You know what I mean? And so we're waiting in line, and the excitement begins to wane a little bit. Shayna goes and gets me a hot chocolate, so I start to build my excitement again. And Sloan, our youngest, is still very excited. So she's excited to see Santa. And we get up to the front, and we start to walk up to Santa. And like every kid in the history of time, she begins to freak out. She begins to cry and scream because all of a sudden Santa is scary. And like every parent in the history of time, it's the only stranger that we force our terrified kid upon. It's a really cruel thing that we do. But we all do it. Every year. I've done it 3 times now. And we sat in bed last night laughing at all the photos of our kids crying on Santa's lap. So I snapped my picture, and of course it's 2018, so I posted it online with the caption, "It's the most wonderful time of the year." Sarcastically, of course. But we use this word wonderful in far less loftier context. Isaiah is writing this, and he uses this word to say that Jesus is wonderful in such a way that will absolutely baffle your mind. It's incomprehensible how good of a counselor he is. The same word is used in Judges when an angel comes to Samson's parents and tells them that Samson will be born. And Samson's father looks at this angel, and he asks the angel what his name is. And the angel looks back, and he says, "Why do you ask my name? It's too wonderful for you to understand." It's incomprehensible. Isaiah uses the same word in describing the guide for our life, the counselor for our life, every area of our life. And if you think that you know what good is, you have no idea. Isaiah is incomprehensible. I cannot begin to tell you how good he is. You don't know anything. This God is so wonderful. He's so good. You're going to begin to fathom how truly good this counselor is, and he's here to help you. Isaiah says he's wonderful. He's wonderful. He's incomprehensible. Jesus is born, and he's fully God, and he's fully human. So the ultimate counselor counsels with an understanding that he knows what it's like to walk in flesh and bones. The ultimate counselor understands what it's like to be in our position. At the same time, the ultimate counselor was born fully human and fully God. So not only does he understand what it's like to walk in flesh and bones, he understands what it's like to create the universe. Like, he understands what it's like down here, but he also understands what it's like up here. And this is the weight that he counsels with. Because his knowledge of how we should live is so extensive and so much further past our understanding. Last week we talked about generosity, right? And we never regret generosity. We never regret generosity, so always be generous. And what's so incredibly cool about being generous is the way that God has set up life is that we get the kickback from generosity. When we're generous, we always receive. Something comes back on us when we're generous. This is the way that the ultimate counselor, the wonderful counselor, has set up life to be. That when we're generous, we typically receive. When we forgive, we find freedom. When we serve, we find purpose. When we worship, we find worth. When we pray, we find God's presence. There's always something that kicks back on us when we live the way that God designed us to live. When we live the way that the ultimate counselor created us to live. That's how he designed it. And we benefit from it. We're the beneficiary of the way that God set up life to be lived. You get that? That's good stuff. And see, maybe for a lot of us, we understand and we know the way that we're supposed to live. We know the difference between right and wrong. We know the difference between sin and not sinning, dark and light. Our problem is our ability to live it out. We know what it's supposed to look like, but we have a really hard time living it out. Which leads to our second thing. Isaiah goes on and he offers up this capability for number 2, for us to borrow God's strength. For us to borrow God's strength. He says a child is born and he's going to be called Wonderful Counselor and Mighty God. A few years ago, I was in a thrift store in Michigan. And I run across this painting of Jesus. My biggest regret in life is not buying this painting. Here's why. I immediately saw it. I snapped a photo, and again, it's my thing, right? So I posted on social media with the caption, College Jesus. Because there was something about this painting that just looked like College Jesus. Was it sacrilegious? Possibly. The area is gray. But everything about this painting looked like College Jesus. I'll show you sometime, not today, sometime. Here's why. This painting of Jesus, he had this long flowing hair. Not just your standard straight hair that you see in a lot of paintings of Jesus, but this wavy hair, flowing hair. It almost looked like there was a fan blowing on Jesus at the time. And he had his beard, right? We know Jesus had a beard, but it wasn't like a big beard. It wasn't your typical beard. It was maybe just a low past stubble, right? It was a cool beard because he's College Jesus. And I'm working my way down, right? So you get to his shirt. And his shirt, I'm not joking you, it was one of those wool ponchos that you get from Mexico. You know what I'm talking about? That you see on college kids? That was what College Jesus was wearing. And so for me, I adopted this picture of Jesus. When I read stories about Jesus, this is the guy that I see. Everything about this painting exudes hacky sack, right? Like that was just this picture of Jesus. And so that's who I see. And we all have our images of Jesus. And usually our pictures of Jesus are relatively soft. They're meek, they're mild pictures of Jesus. They're College Jesus. Maybe right after Jesus has kids, right? And he's calmed down a little bit. Like Jesus didn't have kids. But that's how we see him. Soft and mild and meek. You know, Isaiah is speaking and he says, man, this God that we're talking about, this God that's going to be born of a child, he's called Mighty God. He's called Mighty God. That mighty is big. It's a big, big word. Again, this reference to this child that's coming won't be born for hundreds of years. And this encouragement that Isaiah is giving boasts of a child that's fully human and also fully mighty God. He's a boy. We were talking the other day about 12-year-old Jesus. It's weird to think that Jesus went through adolescence. Because the adolescent, he's still mighty God. He's still mighty God. And even not physically mighty, but he's the kind of mighty that can deal with you when your health issues spiral out of control. He's the kind of mighty God that can rectify our wrongs. He's the kind of mighty God that deals with our issues past, present, and the future ones. That's the type of mighty God that he is. So the question becomes, how do we hold the power of God in our life? What do we do with it? When Isaiah says there's this mighty God coming, there's this baby that's coming, he's going to be called mighty God. How do we hold that power in our life? Because one of the things about him is he says he's mighty God, but the mighty God also holds this incredible capability of not forcing himself on us. And yet at the same time, all he asks us to do is request it. And we can have this strength that God has. Here's number 3. We have to accept God's acceptance. You want true joy, accept God's acceptance. Here's what I mean by that. We have to understand who we are positionally because we will constantly fail practically. We have to understand that we have acceptance. And if we don't understand that we have acceptance, then this fact that we will constantly, daily fail practically will bury us. It will ruin us. Isaiah goes on and he says there's this baby that's going to be born. A son is going to be given, and he's going to be called Wonderful Counselor. He's called Mighty God. He's called Everlasting Father. It literally means Father forever. And I don't know what your notion is of that term, father. Maybe it's bad. People don't grow up with good fathers all the time. In this context, it's a superlative. It is as good as it gets. If you can think of the word father, this is 1 billion times better. No matter how good your dad was, he's tender and he's warm and he's kind. As previously stated, he's mighty. He's a protector. He's an encourager. He's a provider. He's a compass. This is the Father that's coming. God's love is passionate. He's so passionate that he would go as far to offer up his son to die on a cross for us, and it's all encompassed in this Christmas story. Where God's desperation to communicate that to us is born. To communicate his passion for us, his love for us. That's the Father. And throughout this whole story, each and every detail show us that very thing. That maybe we can pick apart this story and we can see that God sends his son to a woman and she's poor and she has nowhere to go. And so Jesus is born in a barn, almost to say, man, I'd go through anything for you. And then he grows up and he's friends with prostitutes and tax collectors, almost to say, man, I want to be with you, and it doesn't matter if you're not perfect. 33 years later into his life, he goes and he throws this 100-pound crossbeam over his shoulders, and he stumbles through the streets almost to say, man, you're worthwhile, and this is the value that you have to me. Constantly, the Father is conveying this to us. That's the Father that I want to serve. That's the Father that I want to sit under. That's the Father that I want to honor. That's the Father that I want to live my life under. Finally, here's number 4. You have to choose real peace. We want real joy, we got to choose real peace. Isaiah goes on, he says a baby is going to be born. A son is going to be sent. He's going to be called Wonderful Counselor. He's going to be called Mighty God. He's going to be called Everlasting Father. And he's going to be called Prince of Peace. I can't imagine for this group of people that Isaiah is talking to who have been at war for 200 years, what it must have been like to hear a prophet say somebody is coming and his name is peace. Somebody's coming, his name is peace. These are afflicted people. These are people that have been beaten down. And Isaiah is saying peace is coming. Not only is his name peace, he's still the Wonderful Counselor, the incomprehensible Counselor. He's the mighty God. He's the everlasting Father. The Father will go through anything for you. And he's Prince of Peace. Paul says this in Romans 5, therefore, since we've been justified through faith, we have peace with God through Jesus Christ. See, even in a world that we live in today where there's so much hate and there's so much anger and there's so much violence and war, we look around and it's hard for us to see that the God that embodies peace is still at work. But I don't think necessarily Isaiah is referencing physical safety or political harmony. Honestly, I think that's a peace that he's referring to. See, Isaiah is not necessarily looking at the birth of a baby, but rather what that baby will grow up to do. He says this 44 chapters later, Isaiah says, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And by his wounds we're healed. The punishment that brought us peace, that's on him. That's what he did for us. And we have to understand that peace doesn't necessarily mean easy. Jesus never promised us easy. In fact, he told us to expect tribulation. What he did promise us was presence. What he did promise us is his hand of action. And all we have to do is call on him, and he provides this peace that passes all understanding, and it's free peace. It's free. We talked about it last week. We don't have to earn the peace. The peace is there for us. He's already given it to us. We have to take it. Here's your final thought today. Lasting joy comes through trust. Lasting joy comes through trust. It comes through trust. It's trust that says he is who he says he is. Shortly before that last passage, Isaiah is writing, and he says, and the government will be on his shoulders. The Message translation says it like this. It says, he'll take over the running of the world. A baby's coming. A baby will be born that's fully human and fully God, and he's going to take over the running of the world. In ancient biblical times, doors were locked and unlocked with a long wooden key. And oftentimes they would take the key and they would fling it over their shoulder. And only the person that had the authority to lock and unlock the door would fling this key over his shoulder. And they would walk with a key on their shoulder. They held the authority. And I think that Isaiah is referencing this image when he says that this is all on his shoulders. The image that Jesus is shouldering the weight for us, shouldering the burden for us. We know that term. We use it to shoulder something. There's a baby that's going to be born, and he's going to shoulder the weight for us. Everything that is to come will sit on him. Our responsibility in it is to trust that he is who he says he is. All of this is in his hands. Amen? Come, let me pray for you. God, thank you.